is rare, if ever, that every route, every expressway on the island of Montreal was affected to the extent that it was this afternoon. If you had a problem with your vehicle, likely it was towed away. The best thing to do later tomorrow is check with the Quebec police, but it'll be quite some time, certainly, before all the paperwork is done. And as we say, quite a while before we can realize the full extent to the roadwork network through Montreal. My feeling is, though, there has been severe damage to several expressways. Rick Leckner reporting from the CJAD helicopter.
There's the GOAT right there, greatest of all time traffic reporter Rick Leckner, and I can say that because he is on the CJAD 800 Wall of Fame. Rick is on the line as we look back at 80 years of CJAD and also do an in-transit segment. Rick, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Elias. What a pleasure to be here. And let me just say that 57 years of my young life have been dedicated to CJAD.
So it's
in one way or another.
Almost 3/4 of our entire history. So it's absolutely perfect that you are in the mix this week as we look back.
Thank you.
Rick, yesterday Rob Braid was on the show, former general manager here at CJAD, and we were talking about the 87 flood. Why don't we just talk about that? Of the traffic stories that you did over the years, where does that rank? What else is top of mind when it comes to traffic?
Oh, there's just so much. That's clearly one of them. There was the massive snowstorm of March 71, I believe it was.
Yeah.
An incredible amount of snow where I literally got on a snowmobile and went to pick up my pilot, at that time Lloyd Ayres, in Pierrefonds. I remember traveling down the abandoned but snow-covered Trans-Canada Highway, and I put Lloyd in the back of the Skidoo, and we made it to the airport, and we were able to fly. You know what? I was a real aggressive individual in those days because I didn't want very much to stop me from reporting traffic to our listeners.
Nothing could stop you, eh?
Little. Sometimes air traffic control did, because we had certain limits that we had to respect for safety reasons. But there was a lot of pushback in those days, let me say.
Let's talk about the chopper, the helicopter, and going above the skies here. Obviously traffic's covered in a different way nowadays. But how do you view that period where people relied on you being above them in the sky to get to work?
I loved it. I miss it. I think that traffic today is as bad as it ever was, and worse. But I truly believe that even with all the cameras and the reporting that we do so well in CJAD, there's nothing like the flexibility of a helicopter. You could say, well, you couldn't be over the entire city at the same time, but we could move rapidly. And I had a network of actually francophone traffic reporters I dealt with, even when I was up on the helicopter. So we missed nothing, and I was able to get from point A to B very quickly and really get a bird's eye view of how things were evolving. And I was heavily involved in those days with both Montreal Police and CJAD Quebec, so we could get movements happening as we tried to with Transport Quebec. So it was a very proactive role that I played in those days.
Let me ask you, if you had a chopper today, would it go to the same places that you went to, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Has the traffic hotspots remained constant over the years, or would you fly a little bit differently today?
I'd say they're more widespread because there has been population sprawl as people move away from the big city and the big taxes. But I would think these days increasingly restricted by the tower at Dorval because of air traffic control limitations. For example, even in those days, we were not allowed to fly directly over the Metropolitan. We'd cheat a little bit, we'd get a little close, but, we were restricted, certainly weather-wise. We needed a 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 miles forward visibility and those were the minimums in order to allow us to fly. But basically, I'd say it would be primarily the same thing because a lot of the traffic is still focused on trying to get onto the island of Montreal in the morning and then trying to get off in the afternoon.
Rick, you were mentioning 57 years, right, of your life connected to CJAD. Do you remember day one? Can you take me back to day one?
I absolutely do, because I was working at another radio station. Well, it's now actually it was CKGM in those days. I started at CKGM at the age of 16 and a half in the summer of 1966. And as I like to tell people, I was beating Sidney Margulies to too many fires and other news events. So he hired me, And I started on Sunday, April 1st, 1968. My first story was a drowning in Riviere-des-Prairies, and I was on with Doris Clark.
Wow. Jeez. Just right into it, huh? Day one, right into it.
And, by the way, I had to change my name. Well, they asked me to change my name, and I kind of refused because at CKGM in those days, I was Rick Leckner, so they made me change my name to Richard. Well, the Richard stuck for about 3 or 4 months, and then we went back to Rick.
Oh my goodness! They tried to change your name. I can't even.
Well, slightly.
But I can't.
I left one Montreal station, Elias, on a Friday and started on the next on a Sunday.
I love that.
Quebec Provincial Police say they have not yet arrived in Rawdon and have not yet found any other body, notwithstanding any rumors that might be circulating on other media at this hour. The only confirmation is that Pierre Laporte has been murdered by the FLQ terrorists. Canada, said the Prime Minister on Friday evening, has no place for intimidation.
Canada remains one of the most wholesome and humane lands on this earth. If we stand firm, this current situation will soon pass. We will be able to say proudly, as we have for decades, that within Canada there is ample room for opposition and dissent, but none for intimidation and terror.
That's Sidney Margolis reporting there on CJAD 800 during the October crisis of 1970. Of course, it stands as one of the most dramatic and destabilizing moments in Canadian history. The FLQ, a militant separatist group, kidnapping British diplomat James Cross, and days later, Quebec Cabinet Minister Pierre Laporte. And you hear the reporting there and the clip of Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. Continuing our conversation with Rick Leckner, who has been at CJAD for so many years and was there in 1970. Rick, take us back to the October crisis of 1970 and what was happening at CJAD and the coverage.
Well, when I was asked to pick a story, it was difficult to do so, but, what stood out head and shoulders was this situation. And I must say that, listening to Sidney brings back great memories because Sidney, Peter Sherman, and I, we were unbeatable. We were just unbeatable. We were known as the JMS, the Jewish Mobile Squad, and we killed everyone with every story. But that story was extremely frightening, Elias, because at times there seemed no end to it, no end to the length of the story, no end to the ramifications, and there were all kinds of issues, of course, that led up to the October crisis, including bombings throughout the city of Montreal from 1963, I believe, to 70, many of which we covered as well. But the FLQ crisis, as I say, unquestionably, and they say it was the worst crisis in Canada since World War II. And the frightening thing was that it was believed that the FLQ was a large, powerful organization because they kidnapped James Cross from his home on Redpath Crescent on October the 5th, and then made demands. And then 5 days later, Pierre Laporte was kidnapped while he was playing football with his son, I believe. And then, of course, the assassination of Pierre Laporte, the invocation of the War Measures Act, which suspended civil liberties. There was just so much going on. The streets of Montreal, filled with military, with tanks. And as I say, it was extremely frightening because it appeared that not just the city, the province, but the country was in the grips of a major terrorist organization.
When Pierre-Elliott Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act and civil liberties are suspended, just take me to that moment. Take me about the feeling, the vibe, everything on the streets of Montreal.
Well, there was utter fear, and I think people actually welcomed it because the invocation of the War Measures Act came just after Pierre Laporte was kidnapped and just before his body was found. And I think, if I remember correctly, and I read back, at that time, most people, opinion polls supported the War Measures Act, despite the police went out and made arrests because police powers were omnipresent. They could do basically what they want, and they arrested just under 500 people, many of whom were released quickly. But still, I mean, many people you would never think would be in the crosshairs of the police force were thrown behind bars. So there was initially tremendous support, but as the years went on, a lot of consternation. And of course, the War Measures Act was eventually replaced by what we now call the Emergency Management Act in 2007. But it was an extremely emotional time. People were extremely uneasy, waiting literally for the next shoe to drop.
And what was it like inside here at CJAD in the newsroom? How was it? What was the decision-making process? Right, with a whole bunch of things that were very contentious on coverage and what you can say and what you can't say and that kind of stuff. Tell me about what was happening internally here in the newsroom aspect of it all.
Look, CJAD has always been known for tremendous news coverage, and to this day still is. And in those days, we had a wonderful team, and Sydney, Peter, and I there was no sleeping for 3 months. I can tell you that much. But there were constant meetings. Certain things were done on the fly because it just changed so quickly. But one of the most difficult things was trying to get information, because all the contacts that we traditionally had were sealed. You couldn't speak to anyone. You couldn't get in touch with anyone within the police department or within the political circles. That was all controlled, and we just had to, go with the flow, as it were, and maintain ongoing coverage, which is what we did up until December 3rd, when they found James Cross in a home in Montreal North, and then there was this incredible motorcade from the home where he was released in Montreal North along the Metropolitan, and I believe Sydney was in that motorcade, out to the airport because they demanded to be flown to Cuba, which they were at that time. So as I say, this never had a dull moment, unfortunately, and is remembered today as one of the most serious issues that the country faced.
Well, Rick, your career at CJAD through news and through traffic, of course, so terrific that you ended up on the wall here, on the Wall of Fame.
Yes, thank you.
Now, on Monday, we're going to be inducting. It's in mum's the word, of course, a big surprise for Monday. There will be a new inductee in the Wall of Fame. Can I just ask you ahead of that, how did that feel to be added to that, and how you view Monday coming up when someone else will go on the wall?
I think it's great. It was a huge surprise for me because I was asked to attend the Aaron Rand show live. It was during COVID. And so I drove down to the station, and I started to do an interview with Aaron. I guess it was about traffic or different things. And all of a sudden, they announced that I had been inducted, and I actually started to cry.
Wow. Yeah. Well deserved.
To be part of an organization such as CJAD for all these years, it's an honor. And we have a dedication to our listeners, which is why listeners have supported CJAD all these years. Why listeners have been extremely generous to me personally, and I've loved every moment of it.
Richard, you'll be there on Monday? Will I see you on Monday?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. We'll catch up again then. It's all, and I should say thank you, because over the years, I'm a small part of this CJAD history. 7 years here at CJAD, but it's always been so great to have you on throughout the years for your insights. So, Rick, we'll catch you on Monday, and thanks for coming on today and reminiscing.
We look forward to it, and your presence is very, very important at CJAD, and I'm certain will continue for many years to come.
Rick, you're the best. We'll talk real soon. There's Rick Leckner on the CJAD 800 Wall of Fame, and we will be adding another name to that wall come Monday.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years.
And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.